Scusa. Okay, I'll try again. I was speaking loudly anyway. I shall now speak more quietly, but down the microphone. We really did want this. We are asking a question here. Is a physical newsroom worth fighting for? And we were hoping that we would get your ideas as well. But because there's no Q&A, we're going to do a lot of the talking. But brilliant, innovative journalists earlier today have found a good way of getting audience participation. So if you would like to ask a question or if you would like to share something, tweet me directly. I'm at newsedjane, N-E-W-S-E-D, so news editor but shortened, newsed and Jane. And I will have my trusty phone here and I will pick up your questions. So we'll do it like that and hopefully still make some interactivity through the session. So a big warm welcome this afternoon. We are going to be spending the next hour or so talking about post-pandemic, is a physical newsroom worth fighting for? One of the things that I've loved about COVID is that it has entirely changed the argument about how we treat our people in newsrooms. I have spent many times in my life fighting for flexible working for staff, fighting for getting people part-time jobs and the like. And I would always come across this supposition that if people aren't in the office, how do you know that they're actually working? COVID has blown that apart. We've all proved that we can work at home. We've proved our teams can work at home. And flexibility is now absolute table stakes. It's, fundamental, really, I think, to a lot of the way that we do our business. But if you're like me, when I joined my first newsroom, I learned so much from the people around me. I had such a good time sort of listening to other people who were doing incredible journalism and dealing with sources, sorting out stories, planning their stories. I would sit down with people who would sub-edit my copy when I was a text reporter. I learned a lot about going on shoots by going out with the photographer because they just needed someone to go and carry the tripod for the video camera or whatever it was. And so I love being in a newsroom. I really have missed it a lot. And as soon as our office opened up, I was back in there to try and get the vibe again. But I'm getting older and I'm getting grayer, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the old school now. But I think what it has taught us is that things aren't going back to the way that things were before the pandemic, but what's it going to look like instead? So we're going to just debate that over the next hour or so. I'm joined by my brilliant colleagues here on the panel. Nic is going to start. Nic wrote a study. He spoke to many newsrooms last year about this topic, so he's going to present some of the findings of his research. Maike is joining us from RTLNEWS in Germany, and they have been doing some really interesting thinking about their newsroom, which comes from predominantly television background, but now increasingly digital. And then Angela will be joining us from the Globe and Mail in Toronto, and speaking therefore from more of a print background, but also more digital, about some of the changes that they're seeing. And then I'll kind of take over and we'll go into a little bit of a discussion and debate. So Nic, I will turn the mic across to you.
Great, and if we could just bring up the slides, that would be great. So this is from a report we did last November called Changing Newsrooms, which I wrote with Federica Cherubini from the Reuters Institute, and together it's based on a survey and also a series of in-depth interviews that we did on how the industry was planning to deal with this huge shift to hybrid. Back in November, we thought it was imminent. Of course, we've had a few COVID variants since then. And I think that's really important to sort of state right at the beginning that we're still really at an early stage. Coronavirus is not over, and most of the media companies we were talking to are still really trying to work out what to do. So 60% still trying to decide how to make hybrid work. What are the rules that are going to govern this? About a third have already decided what to do, and they're sort of moving towards that hybrid future already. So in many cases, they've communicated with staff. For example, a number of regional publishers in the UK have closed most of their offices. They've renegotiated the contracts with staff, so you're now a remote worker or a remote worker with hubs. So really significant changes already taking place. But for many people, it's like Martin Kosnek, editor-in-chief of Der Standard, who it's right at the top of his to-do list, mastering this shift from remote to hybrid work, and thinking about all of the different processes that are going to be required in the process. But as Jane says, not going back to how things were before. This is the key slide for me in the report, because it really sets out what respondents feel have been the gains and the losses of the enforced period of remote working that we've been through. So on balance, people feel that it's been really good for efficiency. Meetings have taken a shorter amount of time. It's been good for employee well-being in that people have had more flexibility. There's obviously been some mental health problems. So it's not been good for everyone, but on balance, people think that it's been good. But there are huge losses here in collaboration, creativity, communication. So we stole this idea of the 3 C's from Jane, who's going to talk about it in a bit more detail. But people really worry about, the lost connection with the values of the organization and the culture of the organization. And the challenge, I think, is how do we build that back now as we move to hybrid? And that leads us really to the idea of rethinking what the office is for. If it's not going to be a place where we primarily do our work, or where some people don't do their work anymore, can we rebuild it as a place for creativity and collaboration? This is a picture from El Diario in Spain, and they redesigned, during the pandemic, they redesigned their offices, not as a fortress, but as somewhere where they can have member events, and they can really think about it very differently as a sort of porous newsroom, if you like. A very different kind of concept. So I think there are many different newsrooms that we might want to fight for. We don't necessarily want to fight for the ones that were there in the past, but maybe there's some really exciting ones physical newsrooms we could think about for the future. So there's a lot to think about here, not least the fact that some roles lend themselves much more to remote working than others. So, if you're a beat reporter, for example, working intensely on a particular story, then you don't necessarily need to collaborate during that story. Then that's sort of fairly easy to do remotely. Or if you're a software engineer that needs complete focus, then again, 92% feel that those roles are appropriate and for remote working. But if you're working in a television or radio studio, where to a tight deadline, where it's all about coordination, quick-fire communication, only about a quarter think that these roles are best suited to remote working. And of course, there are many roles in between. So we maybe can think of a matrix. So on the sort of vertical axis, you have sort of individual focus on the one hand, and then you have team focus on the other hand, where maybe you need to be more together and more collaborative. But then we also need to bear in mind the other axis, which is about life experience and life stage. So older, more experienced journalists who don't need as much sort of support or supervision, of course, can work from anywhere. But then how will younger journalists learn? How will they pick up via osmosis, which often happens from those older journalists? So, there's a whole load of sort of questions here, I think, about equity. The roles make a big difference, but do you want to make everyone work at home or come into the office regardless of these differences? Or, and how is that going to square with the needs of the business? So that lack of geography also, on the other hand, opens up lots of opportunities to recruit more diverse talent, or better people, and I think these are just some of the very big questions that I think come out of this shift to hybrid working that we can pick up.
Brilliant, Nic. Thank you so much. So we're going to turn now over to Maike from RTLNEWS in Germany, and she's going to speak a little bit about how they've been rethinking their newsroom. So Maike, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I was just thinking that when the pandemic started, we wanted to try more mobile office for our employees. Wanted to start with 5 days a month. It's kind of funny because I think it was the first day when we tried that, and that's when lockdown came. So everything has changed since then, of course. And during the pandemic, we realized at a very early stage that we had to rethink our ways of working. As you see here, we're located in Cologne, near the River Rhine, and it's a lot more than just thinking about building, though, of course. It's got a lot to do with culture, the way of working, and we've realized very early that we had to think about all of that at the same time. We did 2 surveys at the very beginning, and then towards the middle of the pandemic, all of our employees said that, well, like Nic said mostly, it's that collaboration, communication sense, which people were missing. They were enjoying the fact that, of course, work-life balance is a lot easier when you're able to work from home. Being able to do focused work from home, the combination, that's what people really enjoy of our staff. And they also see the challenges, of course, of hybrid work. So another thing that we found out that most employees wanted to work remotely 50% of their time, more or less, not all of the time. Of course, it depends on the role that you have. And it meant for us that we had to, well, first of all, think of how to design our floor space more effectively, because we didn't want to have half of the space empty all of the time. And then to create communication areas where we can offer exactly what people were looking for. Getting together, collaborating, but also having smaller spaces to get together. It's just a combination of different offers that we talked about. And that's the logic behind our new newsroom concept. Or can we go back to the other slide, maybe just earlier? Yeah, because that's another very important thing that we discussed. Before designing the concept, we defined principles that our concept is based on. First of all, we've got desk sharing for everyone now with standardized equipment, workspaces with specific requirements for certain roles and jobs. There are certain roles in graphics, for example, other jobs that require certain equipment, so we take care of that. We have no more individual offices. Of course, that's something that really hurt some people more than others, you may imagine, and that's why change management is so important during the process, because it is, of course, a challenge for everyone to deal with, but we've been quite successful talking to people, making them understand the concept and offering alternatives if they don't have their individual offices anymore. Then, just wait, I can't see. Okay, we've got home bases for everyone. That's another important thing, which means we've got desk sharing, but it doesn't mean that every team is lost in space. But every team has got a home base, and in which they do desk sharing. And we offer a combination of remote and on-site work depending on the role or the job. We're not a remote company. That's what we strongly believe in, and we've told everyone. And we've got central communication hubs, we call them hubs, with diverse offerings, a lounge, focus zone, coffee bar, and so forth. You'll see some pictures of that later on. And a variety of rooms in the work areas for private conversations, hybrid meetings. I mean, that's something which has really changed. There's such a need for smaller retreat rooms where people can do hybrid calls. And we've got a mobile office kit for everyone, with a screen, with a mouse and so forth, so everyone is really able to work from home. Now talking about our concept, next slide. It just should give you a basic idea of our concept. It's a combination of the central hubs, as you can see here, the purple area, the communication area. Then we've got big creative meeting rooms, which are blue, smaller rooms, which are yellows, a variety of different offers. I don't have to go into detail too much here, just to give you an idea. Our newsroom, as you can tell, we've got about 1,000 people just working within our journalistic department in Cologne. It's not one room, but various rooms. We've got an open space concept, but not too many desks in a row. That's something which we think is really important, because people are so, even more important now than before, people are so used to the peace and quiet of the home. So once they come back to the newsroom and it's very noisy, that really is an issue. In general, noise is something we have to be aware of and find solutions for, but it's something we've been very focused on solving in this concept that we have. So let me go on to the pictures. So this is an impression of the central hub that we have designed with an architectural office from Switzerland, well-known architectural office, Evolution Design. As you can see, different offers are in that zone. You find some kind of bar where people can get together. This is it here. Then we've got an amphitheater. No, we've got a coffee bar where people can get together. We've got a lounge area. Sorry. Then the next one, yeah, that's the amphitheater where you can present things, get together with people, also just have a coffee. There it's more like a library type of atmosphere, but you can also have meetings. Of course, you can see screens included everywhere. We try to include, of course, screens and possibilities to have hybrid meetings, to get together. That's something which is really, really important now. Then we've got so-called diners, also important to have meetings there or to just sit there and work by yourself. And finally, I don't have a picture of that, but I can tell you we've got focus rooms there. You see that, I think, in the other picture, but a variety of offers that takes into account that people, once they come into the newsroom, they want to get together, but of course they still want to be able to not just talk to each other, but also work together. And so we've tried to take that into consideration, and we're very positive that people are really willing to come back into the newsroom. We can already sense that, but of course it has to be a combination of hybrid work and the newsroom. And I'll hand over to Ansa.
Hi, everyone. I guess I'll shift that over. Hi, everyone. So I'm Angela Pacienza, executive editor at the Globe and Mail, which is we're based in Toronto, but we actually have offices across Canada, and we also have 10 foreign reporters around the world. So at any given point, there has always been some sort of remote work happening in our office. Our view of return to work is very much focused around a hybrid office with a virtual first mindset, with the idea that there is always going to be a certain percentage of people at home. And so we have to make all of our processes and all of our office behavior with that virtual first mindset so that no one gets left behind and no one is left out of conversation. So what we did is, so about 3 years before the pandemic, we moved into a very shiny, beautiful new building, completely outfitted for us, and then the pandemic hit, and now we don't need all of that space. So we gave up 25% of our floor space, so one floor. So our staff now are over 2 floors instead of 1 floor. It assumes that everyone will be coming in about 2 days a week. If people want to come in more often, we'll allow it. We just need, there can't be, we've got thresholds. So 100% of people can't come in 100% of the time, or there won't be space for everyone. So that's sort of how we've gone to it. And our philosophy behind it was really about making the office a destination and giving the destination a purpose. And so the purpose of the office would be for collaboration, for social connection with your colleagues, enhanced tools and equipment that you can't get at home. So for example, our podcast studio, it will be better than the closets that we've been using for 2 years. And so that kind of thing. And then mentorship and learning. We think, while mentorship and learning obviously has happened these last 2 years, the in-person face-to-face is much more meaningful. And so that's another idea of the office as this destination where that type of behavior can happen. We've done a lot of the same things as others, conferencing equipment everywhere. We use an app so you can pick a desk that you're going to sit at. What we've done is we've created zones. We call them neighborhoods. And so if you want to sit with colleagues, like-minded colleagues of certain topic areas or whatnot, you can pick that neighborhood to go into that day, and you can see who else is going in that day, so you can sit near them. Similarly to Maike, so that's a photo of a pod of 6, but we're only letting 3 people sit at a pod at any given time, so we can maintain space. We've got a combination of people wearing masks and not masks. We've got all sorts of rules. We also made vaccination mandatory for all staff, and so you know, if you're going in, all of your colleagues who work there are vaccinated. No offices as well, which also caused a bit of a stir, and we had all of the conversations around, well, I can't be a manager and not have an office. We have bookable rooms and that sort of thing going on. Everyone's got a locker that they can keep things in as long as they want to. If you're a regular, if you're someone who comes to the office 5 days a week, you can get your own desk. That's an incentive to come in more frequently. That's a pilot project we're trying. Again, though, if 100% of people said that, we couldn't actually do it because we don't have that space. So yeah, that kind of gives you an overview. And if you want to just go to the next slide. Some of the things, though, I don't have finished pictures because we're still in the process of renovating. We're getting some bookcases with acoustic paneling to absorb some of that sound, and freestanding dividers and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a very similar concept where there's a lot of collaboration areas happening, so yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So just before we go into the sort of discussion, and thank you very much to those who've already sent in questions. It's great to see some. We're making collaboration happen. And just to remind you, it's NewsRJ if you want to tweet me, and I'll ask the questions in a second. But just before we go there, Nic kindly referred to he took 3 of my 5 C's. But as we were trying to do some thinking about this at Reuters last spring, summer, I was trying to sort of put a framework around some of our thinking, and also, frankly, some of the communication that we need to do to our staff to encourage people back in. Angela was just talking about incentives of having a desk if you come in 5 days a week. We've talked about some other incentives, and maybe we'll get onto that in a second. But really, we were kind of trying to think conceptually, why is it worth you coming back into the office? Like, what is the point? Like, if you can do your job from home, and that's a question that's come in, like, can you do your job productively from home? Why come in? Why come in? So I kind of put together these, what I call the sort of 5 C's of connection. It's always good to have some alliteration. And we can delve more into some of these if you're interested. But I think the 5 things that I really felt we were not so good at if we were working all remotely and all from home were collaboration, creativity, culture, community, and career. And I'll just quickly give a little bit of detail of what I mean by each. On collaboration, I think we've all learned to use Teams or Zoom or Google Meet or whatever it is. We've all started learning to use Miro boards and all sorts of other technology that has made collaboration possible technologically. And just as Angela says, I mean, we work for a global newsroom. We've always got somebody remote, essentially. So it's brilliant that now there's a lot of this technology that makes it easier. But actually what I found was I do a lot of cross-functional work, and I found that when we got back into the office, just being able to collaborate face-to-face took down so many more barriers, and we were able to discuss things much more openly. It was much less us and them, me in my bedroom and you in your kitchen and you in your living room. And there was just more of a vibe when we were together. Now, maybe that's our characters, but I would posit that collaboration is something that really works well when you're together. That links very much into creativity. I was working on a big project to slim down our product lines last year, or year before last now. And I worked really super well with this lovely colleague of mine, Zoe, and we work very well, we trust each other, we were doing great work. But we kind of hit a plateau in this piece of work, and she lived about 20 minutes drive away from my house. So one day I just drove down to her house, and we got lots of Post-its out, and we started putting them up on the wall, and we suddenly saw together, we were sort of challenging each other to think bigger. And as a result, we came up with a much more radical solution than we would have got to if we were there if we were just in our own rooms looking at each other through Teams. Culture's a really tricky one, but I think we've kind of mentioned it, and it's come through in one of the questions as well. Like, how do you pick up what the culture is of a place if you're sitting in your own kitchen or wherever it is? And I was just talking over lunch just now about some of the things that you just naturally pick up. You know, you naturally pick up the fact that, I don't know, some corporate PR says, oh, can you send us the quotes before you publish? And you know, if you work in a newsroom, that you're going to hear a senior editor say, no, we don't do that. You know, we've taken good notes, we've got the transcript, we are going to use the quotes that we choose to use, and you don't have a final say. But if you're a young journalist, you're 2-3 years in, you don't necessarily have that confidence. You haven't picked up that culture of the journalistic independence and the like. It's really hard to be a sponge if there's no water around, you know. Again, maybe this will change. Maybe in this new digital era, we'll learn culture in the metaverse. I don't know. But again, it's something I would posit that you pick up culture more in person than digitally. Community, person who I had lunch with and I met on a training course at Reuters 20-odd years ago, and we're still mates now. I miss my work friends. I like seeing my work friends, and I like having that sort of community feeling. And like, we do difficult jobs in journalism, and doing it together is really important. And I just think that I miss a lot of people. There are a lot of people, if I need to work with them, I'll work with them. I'll see them on Teams. But you don't necessarily put in a water cooler chat with somebody that you only speak to 3 or 4 times a year. You know, that community piece, again, is much stronger in person. And then finally, career. We all know that we need to be breaking distance bias. We all know that we need to be really thinking about who's the squeaky wheel who always gets the promotions. Like, we need to be looking beyond this. So I'm not necessarily saying you need to be in the office to get a promotion. Please don't hear that. But again, I learned the art of writing better by being in the office and working with people, seeing people, talking about. I learned to hone a pitch better by trying to pitch to somebody at the coffee machine and getting their feedback. And those sort of informal moments that you speak to somebody with different experience or more experience or less experience and new, fresher ideas, you build up your own professional skills. So that's what I posited, my 5 C's. I'm sure that there are plenty of other things, and if they begin with a C, that is excellent, and if they don't, I'll still listen to them. But that's kind of, so that's some of the thinking that's happened around this table. I'm sure there's a lot of thinking in this room, so again, please do tweet me, and I'll read some stuff out. But now I think we're just going to move into a bit of a discussion around the table, and I'll bring in your questions as they come in as well. But I just wanted to pick up on one thing that has been mentioned in a couple of the comments, which is this issue around building a more diverse newsroom. And does hybrid working help us to build a more diverse newsroom? And I wonder, Angela, you mentioned that. So could you maybe delve into that a little bit more? Like, what do you mean? This is 2 of my worlds colliding. So
sure.
Help me to put them together.
Yeah, I mean, diversity in a newsroom or diversity in any workplace can mean many different things. There's geographical and socioeconomic, like there are so many. Remote work and hybrid offices, I think, allow for your staff to come from many different places. Our home base in Toronto, it's one of the most expensive cities in Canada to live in. Maybe somebody wants to live in a different province, a different city, a small town. Suddenly you've got those options that we didn't have pre-pandemic. And so I think that allows us to diversify our staff and compete also for talent in a way that we couldn't compete before. I can speak for North America. I'm sure in Europe it's probably very similar, but newsrooms, now that they're more remote, are all competing for the same staff because I don't need to move to New York City anymore. I don't need to move to Los Angeles. I can stay in Toronto. And so whereas previously we were only competing with other workplaces that were in our cities, we're now competing with so many more newsrooms for talent. And having a flexible office arrangement allows us to be more competitive also with staff. So I think there are a lot of pluses on the diversity front.
Nic, this came up in your study as well. Do you want to share some of the other things that you found?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar, really. I mean, the media is often accused of sort of being a metropolitan media elite. So getting rid of geography allows you to recruit people who don't live in those parts and live in more rural areas or There's that debate at the moment about ethnic minorities, very hot area for talent, and so being able to recruit where people live can also improve diversity. We interviewed people, for example, Courts Media, which is moving. It still has an office in New York, but it's essentially moving to being a fully distributed company. And one of the reasons it's doing it is because it believes it can find the best talent wherever it is. And it puts it in an advantage over media companies that insist that you come into an office, for example. And it's really about unlocking that talent, I think, and it relates to diversity.
If I can add something to that, it's interesting because another aspect, which is more like diversity of thought, I could say, usually everyone focused on the headquarters. And now when we've got calls, when we've got meetings, and it's a hybrid meeting, it's more, everyone's on the same level. That has completely changed because our studios in different cities, when we've got meetings, they participate differently than they used to. So that's really good. We've got more diversity of thought in our newsroom all of a sudden. And then once we enable people to not have to move to the big cities and maybe work in one of our smaller studios and live in a rural area, it's going to make our journalism better because they can get more stories from rural areas. And the third thing is that it's great because we can make teams from in different locations collaborate a lot better. Right now we've got a big merger going on with a publishing house, Gruner & Jahr and RTL. We've got locations in Hamburg, in Berlin, in Cologne. It's great with a hybrid world. Now they can cooperate on the same level and not just focusing on the headquarters, but everyone has got pretty much the same situation. So there's a big advantage in that, from my perspective.
And can I ask you, Maike, on that, when you've got people in these different cities, are they working together physically in those cities, so like a mini hub, or are they totally distributed in those places?
Generally, of course, now with the pandemic, it was difficult because many worked from home, but we do have locations in different cities, and smaller ones and bigger ones. And so I presume that many of them will be working in little hubs in those cities. But there are always going to be people working from home. It's going to be a combination. That's not going to go away.
Yeah, excellent. We've mentioned in our calls and also today the idea of bringing people back part-time. So come into the office 2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week. And Angela, you were mentioning these sort of neighbourhood ideas and sort of pulling people together. How hard has it been, and there's a question from one of the audience members here, how hard is it, though, to get people to agree what days they're going to come in? Because it's all well and good if I say I'm going to come in 2 days a week and I'm going to be Monday and Thursday, but then my colleague says, oh, I can't do Monday and Thursday, but I'm going to come in Wednesday. How do you manage this sort of rotoring, as it were?
Yeah, trial and error. Trial and error, but generally, one of the things that we have found is you start with, again, it's all about intentionality. So why are you going in that day? What is the purpose? So, I will tell my team, for example, that I'm there on a Wednesday, and there are certain types of meetings I will only book on Wednesdays now, so that we can all be there, be in person. You've got a purpose to come in. You're going to get FaceTime with me. And then it kind of cascades down from that. And I think if you're trying to do this in your newsrooms, what I would do very similar is, decide on a priority meeting that you might do that day, and then encourage everyone to come in on that particular day because these particular people will be in, and you'll be able to have in-person meetings with those people. The other thing that we have found works really well is if you're going to have an in-office day, don't book a whole bunch of virtual meetings. Try to keep, especially for senior leadership, is keep your days kind of free so you can actually meet face-to-face with people, which is the whole purpose of being in. Now, obviously, you're going to have a couple of meetings where some people will be virtual, and we've got spaces and facilities for that. But by clearing my schedule, people are guaranteed to actually be able to talk to me and not just see me in an office with the door closed because I'm doing a bunch of meetings.
You don't have an office anymore.
Well, in one of our meeting rooms, and fair, but in one of the meeting rooms, which did happen. There, one of the first times I went in, and that's when the light bulb went off in my head is I had gone in, but I had a whole bunch of meetings, and so we did them from one of the hub rooms, and I was like, well, this was a waste. I could have done all of these at home. I really need to start blocking off. So that's what I do now is Wednesdays, I generally have 0 meetings in my calendar, and if meetings do come up, it's because I'm in the office and I'm going to meet in person with those people. Which leads to a whole set of other things you need to consider, which I think we'll get to a little bit later in terms of other tips.
It's really interesting what you say about the walking the room. Back last year, when we were just starting to go back into the office, our editor-in-chief, Alessandra, came in, and she's always so busy. She's, her diary is packed. But she actually had about 45 minutes free, and she just walked out into the newsroom and started walking around and chatting to people about their stories and welcoming them back to the office and everything. And the mood in the room changed instantaneously. And the word went out, and it's a Thursday, and the next Thursday, the office was really quite full. Everyone was like, okay, if I'm going to get seen by the editor-in-chief, I better be in. So I think it does. I think, you're absolutely right. Even if you have a really packed day, trying to get a break in your day to walk the room and to have those conversations is helpful. Have any of you, and Nic, I think in your study, you kind of looked at some of the way that people were being incentivized back. What did you find on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that surprised us actually was the reluctance of people to go back. People have got very comfortable. I mean, some people, desperate to come back, as we've said, but other people, quite reluctant. So media companies are really struggling to get people in right now. So I was at the Financial Times recently, and they've just started doing free food. This is like a Google trick, right? It'll be chauffeur-driven cars next.
Electric cars, autonomous
electric
vehicles.
cars. So yeah, free food, free massages. Some media companies are doing free massaging, trying to create events essentially. So outside talks, inspirational speakers, quizzes, all kinds of things to reconnect, because people have just got into a different lifestyle, and that issue of how do you reconnect with the culture, I think media companies think it's really important. It's worth putting money behind.
Maike, do you have any stories about incentivizing or sort of creating the days for people to come back in?
Well, with many people have been coming back since we're doing broadcasting, so it's kind of, we discussed that, but it would kind of seem strange to have like a welcome package to come back, because so many people have had to come back to be able to broadcast our bulletins. But still, we've done things and discussed things. One was like a list with things to remember when coming back, because it's been such a long time. We're redesigning our canteen where people eat. We'll have gaming area there. We'll have a room with a massage chair and all kinds of offers. We're planning a party once that's possible. Everyone loves to party at RTL, and so people have really missed that. So there's going to be a lot of that. And definitely once the hub is finished, that will be by July, we will probably have something on a regular basis there, have drinks together every Friday or whatever. We're thinking about lots of things to do. But we've got that experience, or that what you just said about your chief editor walking around, that people really like talking to not only their leaders, but colleagues, and have been coming back. But there's a difference, though, because with some roles you don't really have to be in the office, in the newsroom, to do your job. Others, especially in breaking news situations, there you can totally tell the difference once you're in a room together. And I experienced that myself the first weekend of the war. It's completely different when you're together in one newsroom once something like that happens. But with other roles, it's harder for people to come back. They're having a hard time, and we have a recommendation of 2 to 3 days a week working in the office and from home. Might be that some teams will say, well, for us it works 4 days from home and 1 day in the office, and that's possible too. I mean, it just depends on the role, it depends on the teams. And we won't force anyone into the office. I mean, that's one thing. We want to make our offices or our newsroom as attractive as possible, so people will want to come in. It's like a magnet, and not forcing them to come in. That's not how we think about it.
I should just add one very quick thing. I think there are differences. So you take a very collaborative approach, but I have come across, I'm not going to name them, but some newsrooms where the editor basically expects people to come back in, and that's also really effective. I mean, it's very different. They have largely come back in. I mean, obviously on a different basis and sort of 3 days a week, but I think there is very different styles in different countries as well.
And if you'll just allow me, Maike, to just come back to you, because one of the questions that's come in, I think, is probably very pertinent in Germany, and asking who's been at the table when you've made these decisions? Because you mentioned that you had polled people, but like when you've made the decision about 2 or 3 or 4 days and the regional hubs and everything, who's been at the table? And was it just management, all departments, workers' councils? In Germany, of course, that's a big part of it. How were the decisions made?
Those aren't decisions that just the management makes. So, well, first of all, the surveys were really important for us. Then Workers' Council, of course. We've got work groups. We've got a whole, a big project group called Playground working this out. And then during the process, designing our newsroom, in particular in the journalistic area of RTL, we've done interviews with the managers. We've done workshops with all the employees. We've got some, well, you can call them change agents, representing different teams, and then giving us feedback, what works, what doesn't work. And so it's a very collaborative process, like you said, Nic. And but for the guidelines, it's the project group, Workers' Council, management, a combination of all of those, plus the surveys, the results of the surveys.
Angela, you work a lot in editorial innovation, and I just wondered, when I was speaking about collaboration and creativity, did those things resonate with you? How do you feel about sort of, building up these new ways of storytelling and the like?
Yeah, I mean, when we were first when we first went into lockdown and we had to start immediately collaborating through Slack and through WebEx, which is the fun tool we use. Everyone's got their favorite. Collaboration was extremely difficult. Now we learned to get around it. And, I think we've done many incredible collaborations over the last 2 years. We've actually put out some of our best journalism in the last 2 years for a variety of reasons. But when we do start to go back, and we have started to have people in the room together doing that collaboration, and I should say during the pandemic too, we would have a lot of park days where people would go to a park with some blankets and beers often, and have a little bit of collaboration that way too. You do get more outside the box ideas. You do get a lot more brainstorming, a lot of different voices brainstorm. So one of the challenges, I think, for management when collaboration is happening is, on some of the teams, you'll have extroverts and you'll have introverts, and you have to lean so much more heavily into the introverts, particularly virtually, to really pull them into the conversation. And when you're in person, it's more natural and it just happens more spontaneously. So I think that's something newsrooms need to get right in the next year as they're all coming back.
And we're talking about sort of these cross-functional teams, and I think those sort of personality things are very important. I think there's also a generation issue, and again, one of the questions that we have from the audience is from a young journalist on a journalism course currently, and she says her concern is how young journalist students will get those all-important in-person and newsroom work placements and learn the way that we did from around us in the newsroom. So yeah, how can we ensure that people are working together so that young student journalists can continue to benefit from these partnerships? Is that something that the older journalists are aware of, that it's part of their job? I mean, how do we make that happen?
Do you want to go first?
Well, like I said, we're not going to force anyone back into the newsroom, but everyone is welcome in the newsroom. And especially young journalists, I mean, it's a bit different with RTL because maybe we've got a bit more space. So if younger journalists wanted to come in 5 days a week, that would be fine if they feel better then. And of course, our older and more experienced colleagues are aware of the fact that they they should help them. We've got our own school for journalism, which is really important in that aspect. And so that's one thing, and one important thing, onboarding, recruiting younger people to show them how the job is done, which we realize is an essential aspect of being in the newsroom. And so I think that's going to work just fine. And we've experienced that younger colleagues have been wanting to come back even more than more experienced colleagues.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. One way we got around that in the during the pandemic. So, one of the ways that I learned as a young reporter is I sat beside somebody who was amazing at getting anyone to tell her anything, and I picked up so much from that. And we wanted to try to replicate that. And so we definitely we teamed up people, so everyone had a buddy, and we were very intentional with how we made those pairings, and we switched those pairings up every 6 months. Which is also useful. And we had situations where people would eavesdrop on people's phone calls virtually through the Zoom. So you would say, do you mind if this other colleague, because the people that you're interviewing, especially if it's business leaders or politicians, they have the same things going on in their offices. And so, asking, do you mind if a younger colleague helps? We do a lot of collaborative journalism too among our reporters, so they'll work on stories together, and that's another way that you can start to transfer that knowledge. But as we're going back to the office, and again, through our Hive app, you can see where people are seated, and so the younger journalists can pick where they want to sit, so they can sit at a pod with people who they can get information from. The other advantage of that too is when you're in the office, your reporters tend to share their sources and their knowledge more. If you're sitting at home, you have no idea that someone's working on a story that you might have a great source for. And so we're also trying, that's another value of coming into the office, is it will also make your journalism better. But we're also trying to replicate that in a virtual setting with this idea that we're always going to be a certain percentage virtual. We're not ever going to go back to 100%. So.
If I can just share, and thank you, Liz, wherever you are. Hello, Liz, for sharing this. So Liz is at RISJ, and she has shared this, that our newsroom has gone from 20 to nearly 90 over the last year, which is great. More journalism jobs, we like that. But the vast majority of new staff are on their first job, and they have been desperate to be in an office. Average age of the team is 23. Training has been very tough, both for them and for more experienced staff. I think it's impossible to overstate how important being back in a newsroom has been for us. And that's a really interesting point. And I think we've had the same issue where, as you've been saying as well, some of our younger staff have been desperate to come back in. As soon as the office reopened, they were sort of straight back in because they're in flat shares. One of our colleagues was working from an ironing board. That was the only thing that would fit into her room to give her height enough to be able to work on this ironing board. And yet some of our very experienced colleagues, people maybe in their 50s, they've had time to earn more money. They've maybe have their own house. They've probably got more space. Some of them have moved out of town. It's a very comfortable life, thank you very much. And why on earth should I go back to commuting and sweating on a tube with sort of 400 other people and the like? And so you've got quite a generation gap. We find both in the terms of what people want, but also, frankly, the situation at home. One of our brilliant young journalists was sharing with me that she's in a flat share of 4 friends from university, and she just feels that she's doing a master's in journalism with the same friends from university, because she works from her bedroom, and if she goes down to the living room, there's one of her flatmates apparently really likes cooking bacon at about 10 o'clock in the morning when she's trying to interview sources, and she can just smell the bacon, and she's like, I need to get into the office so I don't smell the bloomin' bacon, And I think there's a bit of a generation gap issue here as well.
Yeah, I can maybe just add. I think you need to be much more deliberative about some of these things, like onboarding and mentoring. So, they've been going on for years, but I think you just need to write things down more. So a lot of the sort of core training was done through the assumption there would be someone there to help if questions needed answering, and that may not be the case now. So I think you need to be clearer about writing all those things down, and then also clearer about putting in place mentoring kind of schemes that are going to work in a hybrid world, and that's probably going to be a bit different. So it just requires more deliberative thought about how to do this, I think.
I've got another few questions from the audience here, and thank you very much for being brilliant on Twitter. I think, Nic, you touched on this when you were talking about the employee well-being. And while flexibility and being able to work from home and not being forced into the office while there was a pandemic raging was good for some people's mental health, the isolation has actually been very bad for some people's mental health. I mean, we've certainly seen that at Reuters. We've had people who have really struggled with isolation and have in some cases really got close or got towards burnout because of it. And I just wonder, is that something else as you're thinking and as you're planning this hybrid world that you're having to take into consideration? And are you taking specific steps around mental health?
We've got a variety of offers around mental health because we've realized that really is an issue. I mean, more than ever right now because of the war. I mean, we've got more offers to support people because after COVID and now the war, I mean, many people are just really facing difficulty dealing with all that. So that's a really important thing that we've got, for example, in the morning, you've got some kind of awareness session that you can take. We've got people you can call if you really have got mental issues, of course, all confidential. I mean, that's a really important aspect, and with the combination of COVID and the Ukraine, even more so.
And one thing, one additional thing I think newsrooms can do is create moments for connection, and don't assume people are going to phone or show up to any of those training sessions and whatnot. And I think managers have to go in and pull people and make sure that they connect every day. And so another thing that I think has changed during the pandemic, and I think it will stay, is as a manager, how you spend your day and what your management style is has to change. It cannot be the way it was before the pandemic. You will be a horrible manager if you're not doing anything differently. You need to intentionally go and make sure you've spoken to everybody in one way or another and in their preferred method. And so to me, if we can get our managers more like personality-based training, so whether it's DISC or, there's so many out there, I think that is also key to running a well-functioning newsroom, no matter how many times a week you're going in or not. You have to have that element as part of it.
We've got a couple of questions here about efficiency and productivity. So we have one question. How do we know that working from home is actually more efficient? Nic, maybe you might want to take this one. Could it maybe feel more efficient, but actually be less productive in terms of delivering impactful journalism and business outcomes? How are we measuring these outcomes for consumers and audiences? Nic, do you want to take this? Because you mentioned efficiency first.
I don't work in a newsroom, so I'm going to defer to these two. But I think what came through in the interviews was people hate spending time in meetings, and they definitely feel that meetings have been more efficient. But not just more efficient, actually. I think Maike talked about this earlier, sort of less hierarchical. They're places where in the same time or less, you're able to take account of different views and maybe get better decisions. So I think efficiency, I mean, I'm interested to hear your views on whether that's made better outcomes, but everyone talked about the better quality of editorial morning meetings, for example, without proximity bias or having to impress the editor or some of these kind of issues. So you take that time away and you create quicker and better decisions. That's the theory. Is it working?
Well, if I can just say something about that. Well, of course, the meeting aspect, that's a big thing for us too. They're way more efficient in a hybrid world. Planning can be done very efficiently from home. We have had the situation that unpopular shifts are a lot easier to cover when you have a hybrid model. Well, late night shifts, weekend shifts, and so forth. But then the quality of the reports, even if you have got people who are not that experienced, we believe that the newsroom is better and makes the quality of the reports better, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's worked very well. We've really done a lot, and been quite successful with that. But still, it's just something, as if the newsroom adds something to the reporting, which makes it a little bit better even. But there are some certain aspects in the process which can be done perfectly and very efficiently from home, like planning, for example.
So I have another question that links into what you were just saying about the unpopular working times. But Mark's asking, can the panel talk more about working out of hours and hybrid working? You know, people have now we've talked about the puddle effect of working from home, that you no longer have a start to your day and an end to your day. You're still at home, your computer's still there, you still look at your emails at night. Are you finding that we're now sort of trying to have to bring back in better boundaries, or what was the Globe and Mail staff brilliant at boundaries during lockdown in a way that maybe Reuters wasn't?
Sure, we were brilliant, absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, everyone struggles with this. You know, we've tried a number of things, and it works better for some people than others. You know, to your point earlier about some people might not like where they're working from or their home situation, or maybe they're more lonely, so they're working longer hours because it's something to do. So it kind of can work both ways depending on the individual. But, you know, we try to use Slack notifications a lot, and so if you're finished work for the day, you turn them off, and that's how you know that that person's unavailable. We use the stop sign emoji a lot in our Slack. So I think there are things that management can put into place as best practices and try to encourage everyone to do it. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it has to start at the management level, and they have to do it themselves. And so, you know, I try to model that behavior whenever possible with my team, and I will say, I'm done for the day. You know, if it's an absolute emergency, phone me, but otherwise I'm not going to be checking. And then I'll try to, and again, try, because it doesn't always happen. And I will say that we were doing things pretty good, and then a big news event will happen, and it kind of goes off the rails for a little bit, right? And so I will admit that many of our best practices in the early days of the Ukraine war went out the window, which you would expect, right, for good reason. So, but I think you need management to model these behaviors and actually say, like, I'm not going to answer. So I try really hard not to answer emails in off hours, and even if I'm working, I will use the send later function. I was very happy when Slack brought that on, so I can write a whole bunch of Slack messages, but they'll all go tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And so the really smart people have figured out that I do that, so I now started doing like 9:02, 9:03. But I think that it does model good behavior, because what happens is, you know, again, depending where you are on the scale of an organization, people feel like they have to answer you because you're the boss, you're the executive editor, you're the editor-in-chief, or whatever your title is. And so it's incumbent on those people to model that behavior for then it to cascade down. And if you try to do it from the bottom up, it's never going to work. And that was like pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, so.
Yeah, I feel the same way, that leadership is just essential here. And another thing is that, of course, you're right, from the bottom up, it's hard to fulfill if the leader doesn't support it. Still, we've done various self-management awareness trainings to help people find that border. It was at the beginning of the pandemic, people were having more struggle with that, and it seems like they've gotten better. Encourage people to be open, talk with their managers. I've had one person from my team, for example, telling me, you know what, everyone keeps calling me after 6, and I just kind of want to say at 6, it's over. And so I encourage everyone to be open, and it worked. After that, it worked, and we've been improving that. But it definitely is a leadership issue, and to get the discipline in there. But I don't know. It'd be great to be able to discuss with you right now openly. Would be interesting to see what your experience has been, because from my point of view, the beginning of the pandemic, it was really crazy, because everybody said, "Well, great, I can just do that because I'm online. I can just solve that problem right away." But then after a few months, everybody just realized that force is not there forever, and you just need you to rest sometimes. And so if people have gotten better, that's my experience.
Well, you'll get the chance to speak to these lovely people outside in about 2 minutes, because we're right at the end of our session. And please do, if you can bear the cold, please do congregate outside, and we can continue some of these conversations. We'd love to hear more of your ideas. But just before we go, if you look ahead, Sophia, I don't even want to say 3 years' time. Even 3 months' time feels like a lifetime away. But let's say 18 months ahead. Where do you think we'll be in terms of the newsroom? Do you think we'll be back to the way that we were? Will we have would we have mastered some of these issues of hybrid working that we were talking about? What are some of the big challenges, and where do you think we'll end up? Maike, you can start and then we'll come back down this way.
We're definitely not going to go back to where we were. Definitely not. The hybrid world is gonna stay. I'm absolutely positive that that's the way it's going to be. I strongly believe in the physical newsroom, and that more and more people are going to come back. I believe that work is going to be more flexible in the future, where while the desk was the only place you stayed at before. Now it's going to be different offers that you're going to use depending on what exactly you want to do that day. Maybe working in project groups, going to a focus room or whatever. So work in the newsroom is going to be different from the way it was before. But I do think it's going to be a good mixture of in-office work and hybrid work. I'm pretty sure of that, and I'm very positive it's going to work out.
I like your optimism. It's good. I would add to that that I think what we're going to see in the next few years are new roles in the newsroom. We're probably going to need some sort of masthead or senior leadership role that is in charge of culture, that is in charge of hybrid work environment. And I think the newsrooms that have that type of role, that are, again, very intentional about it and making sure no one gets left behind, will be the more successful ones. So that's something I think is going to be hot.
I think there's going to be obviously physical newsrooms. They're going to remain, but I think they'll be different underneath. So what changes is the operating model, and I think I'm optimistic in the long term, but I think there's a lot to think about. I think it's on the optimistic side, it's going to allow work to be done independent of location. I think that opens up new opportunities, but also creates difficulties. I think it enables us to use talent and think about talent in different ways. At its best, it's about making the working environment in the newsroom less formal. It's about breaking down some of those hierarchies that we talked about, and bringing in more diverse groups and consulting them more in conversations, hopefully for a better outcome. So I think the real changes in that is underneath the physical bricks and mortar in the operating model.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so very much, Maike, Angela, Nic, and thank you very much to you. Thank you very much for everyone who tweeted questions and comments in. And I do hope that this has been interesting, given you some ideas, some little tips and some tricks and some frameworks to think about things. And let's continue the conversation outside or over a cup of coffee. Thank you so much.